All
which
right.
we won't go into at this point.
Okay, I'm beginning to record, and we're not going to post anything without you folks agreeing that it's okay to post. All right, so like we'll cut things if they need to.
So, do I need to introduce myself or not?
Well, I'm going to say that I'm Spencer Downing. I'm the program officer at Social Venture Partners Boulder County. I'm here with Roland Evans, who's one of our SVP partners, and he is a working psychologist and has a fair amount of experience in working directly with leaders going through times of crisis. Hayden Dansky, who is the co-founder and executive director of Boulder Food Rescue, has agreed to join in, partly because what we're trying to do is create something that is real and useful for nonprofit leaders dealing with this crisis such as it is. We're going to start off with Roland giving us an overview of some fundamental principles that apply to crises of all kinds, but also have adjustments to this particular COVID-19 crisis. And then Hayden, we're hopeful, will chime in with honest and real observations and questions, maybe even objections, to say, hey, this is the kind of thing that does work, this is the kind of thing that doesn't work, and we want to make this a kind of conversational response in the hopes that we provide nonprofit leaders something of substance and value in their real lives. So with that, Roland, I'm recording here on a Zoom call, and I'm going to put you as the main speaker view for a bit and hear what you have to say, and then we'll launch into a conversation.
Right. Thanks very much, Spencer. So today I want to talk about how we can care for ourselves and stay resilient, calm, centered during this really difficult time caused by the pandemic. The thing that's really most difficult for human beings are three things: uncertainty, powerlessness, and loss. And of course, we're experiencing all of those things, particularly a lot of uncertainty. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be on ourselves, on our family, or on society even. And not knowing what to expect is extraordinarily stressful for ourselves. We like to have some sense of what the future is going to bring. So the other thing that it brings up for us is that sense of powerlessness. We don't have the same ability to control our lives. We don't have the same ability to protect ourselves, to protect our loved ones, to help with our clients, our constituents, to do what we're meant to do or feel we're meant to do, and to plan for our life and the future and activities that we really want to do. And of course, there's a lot of loss. The first loss that we have is our freedom. Many of us are staying at home, so we have less choices. We're not having those range of choices we normally have. And we have lost our security because we don't know exactly what's happening. We've lost maybe some comfort. Mobility, particularly, we can't just go wherever we want to go. And of course, there's a sense of losing those ways in which we look to the future, the plans that we make, which make us feel as though there's something in front of us. With the social distancing, we also have lost a lot of personal space. Many of us are feeling cooped up, kind of stuck at home, kind of cabin fever. If we live in a small space with others, we can feel on top of each other. And we're used to going out. We're used to just going out whenever we feel like. Going out to work every day, going out to the gym, going out to a restaurant, going out to the movies, doing things, just having that choice of being able to get out of the house. And of course, being stuck in your own space is most difficult if you have children or adolescents in the house, because they themselves are going to be stressed. And when they're stressed, they're going to need more attention. So they're going to be more demanding. So that can be a particularly difficulty for somebody. So there's a lot of losses. And so with all of these losses, insecurities, powerlessness, we easily get imbalanced, unsettled, because we all have vulnerabilities and we all react in our different ways to stress. Those reactions are really based on our history, on things that have happened to us as long back as our childhood, but certainly the patterns that we built up, the expectations that we built up. Some of us are more vulnerable to Anxiety, some are more vulnerable to getting irritated. So anxiety and irritation are two of the main ways in which we respond to stress, but also we could get depressed. Not like a major depression, but certainly that feeling that things are not as they should be. And when we feel uncomfortable, when we feel as though we have these stresses, we often turn to behaviors which are really not that good for us, harmful behaviors. So there's four things which we really need to pay attention to, is anxiety, irritability, depression, and what you might call harmful behaviors. So let's talk about anxiety first. So there are a lot of things to worry about. Most of us have some concerns about our finances, about our job maybe. You know, things are very insecure. Maybe we're worried about our health, or particularly about the health of our loved ones if they're elderly. You know, concerns that they might catch the virus. And of course, when we get anxious, then other things start to happen. We don't sleep as well. We get disturbed sleep patterns. And we find ourselves waking up maybe at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is a very typical time. And we start thinking and things go round and round. And it's hard to stop those things. During the day, we can often notice that we're not relaxing in the same way. We're not relaxing into things. There's a kind of drivenness which we're not able to settle down. And that's caused by low levels of anxiety. And we will maybe overreact. So something comes up that we haven't been expecting and we overreact. Maybe we even panic. And that's because when we're anxious, little things seem like big things. So it's not like the normal hassles are normal hassles. They seem like catastrophes because they've got an additive effect. So the other thing that we're experiencing, I believe, is irritability, particularly with those close to us. Now, we may actually also have anger at some things in society and the way, you know, things are being handled. But that irritability will almost always be expressed in our relationships, in our personal relationships, particularly with those close to us. So there's likely to be more conflict in the house, disagreements, little blow-ups over small things. And if we overreact in that way, this causes extra stress on ourselves and on our relationships. Things get really unsettled. And of course, it's very easy to overreact if you have small children or you have adolescents in the house. As I said before, they are going to be stressed. They are going to be needing more attention. And so they're going to be demanding more. And of course, that can be really feel like a burden. So the losses, as I've said, tend to give rise to a feeling what I would call kind of slight depression. This is not like a big depression, not like people are not functioning, but most people are experiencing tiredness, kind of like a low-level exhaustion, not able to rise to the occasion, and also a disinterest in things which would normally be exciting or interesting, things which we normally enjoy. There's like a loss of what I call almost like a loss of savor. It doesn't actually have the same value or intensity for us. And that's because our energy has kind of gone down. We can also find ourselves bored, like not knowing what to do. Those are also little signs of very slight depressions. And when we're feeling stressed, when we don't know what to do with ourselves, we will tend to do those things which are not really that helpful. So a common one, of course, is eating too much. Just having like, well, I'm bored, what shall I do? Maybe I'll have some crackers. Okay. Or drinking more alcohol, the second glass or the third glass, rather than just having the normal one glass. Spending too much time on the screen, surfing the web, you know, binging out on TV programs. And particularly, which I think is really something to be careful about at this time, is consuming too much negative news. All of these really just add to the stress. They don't help at all. So none of these reactions are particularly abnormal. None of them are really that dysfunctional. But we really have to be careful that when we're having these reactions, that they don't take over our lives. They don't take over the whole of our experience. And they particularly don't interfere with our relationships, because they can kind of get a life of their own. And before we know it, we're kind of going down a bad path. So what should we do? So the thing that's common about human beings is that when we're most stressed, it's then that we forget to do the things which are most helpful. In some sense, we kind of get a memory loss because of the stress. So we really have to pay attention when we're stressed to these early signs of anxiety, of powerlessness, of slight depression, of irritability. We've got to notice when we're kind of off track. So as we recognize those signs, we've got to focus back on developing a more positive attitude, because that's really fundamental, and doing those things which are helpful, doing the behaviors that we know are going to be positive for us, helpful for us, even if they take some effort. So I think of it as we've got to do two things. We've got to organize and structure our outer life so that we have some sense of control, but we also have to do something with our inner life. We've got to settle ourselves down and have some sense in which we have control and influence on our own inner experience. So in times of uncertainty and ambiguity, we need structure. It's the most important thing that we need. Normally, structure is either imposed on us by our work or by external factors or just by our choices. And then we go with that structure, and it adds kind of a sense of certainty to our life. But there isn't much certainty now. So we need to feel more control, not just of external events, but also of ourselves. So I'm going to list just a few things that can be helpful. And you probably have some of your own, which are different from this list. So just think about those things which are most helpful, that you know have been helpful to you in the past, and make sure that you pay attention to them. So as I'm talking about structure, I believe that the first important thing that everybody needs to do is to make a plan. Now that might seem kind of obvious, but I'm talking about really making a plan, sitting down, usually with somebody that you trust, that you enjoy being with, and writing this plan. And it has to have a sense that it's encompassing and capturing the things which cause most uncertainty. So this plan is about staying healthy, and it's also about maintaining a positive lifestyle. And it can be just the simple things like, how am I going to get food? How am I going to maintain social contacts? How am I going to deal with boredom? How am I going to manage my finances? Do I have the medicines I need? Do I actually have the healthcare support I need? And how do I get all of these categories and make sure that I haven't missed anything, so that I don't wake up in the middle of the night and start worrying about it? So when we make a plan, it has to be a rational, calm plan. It's not something that we just kind of do in a panic. And we've got to be careful not to give into what's called catastrophic thinking. Oh my God, this is the end of the world. And catastrophic thinking, we know, will give rise to behaviors which aren't that healthy, like panic buying. I got to buy up every bit of toilet paper in the store. This is not that helpful for you or for other people. So the first thing you make is a weekly plan. And I would say that you should change it every week, and you have a to-do list. So it's got some structure and organization to it. And another thing which you can do from your plan, which is really helpful, is make or write what I call a night list. Now, before we go to sleep is the time when we need to deal with those things which are going to happen the next day. It's better to write your plan, and the research supports this. It's better to write your plan before you go to sleep than in the morning. Why? Because if you write your plan, you sleep better. It's not your plan, it's the list really of things that you need to do, things you want to tackle the next day. Because once you've written those things down, you can tell yourself, I do not need to think about this until tomorrow. And some part of you will get that message and will help you sleep. So now we wake up the next day, and now some more structure, creating a daily schedule. You want to structure your day. And when you structure your day, you want to think about the work things you need to do. You need to think about the breaks you want to take, the activities you want to put in, the meals you want to make. And everything in our day needs to have a kind of balance of two things. And I think of these as maintenance activities and creative activities. So what's a maintenance activity? Maintenance activity is all the things we need to do just to maintain our lifestyle. So that'll be cooking, cleaning, shopping, tidying the house, whatever it is. These are maintenance activities, looking after our finances. And we need to do enough of those that we feel as though things are in control. But that's not the whole of what we need to do. We need some creative activities because human beings need something to look forward to. They need something to actually help them look into the future in a positive way. So there's plenty of stuff that we can do even if we're stuck at home. There's so many things that we can do from online. There's lots of skills that we can learn from online. Personally, I'm a gardener, so I'm in my garden as much as possible. And a lot of people are starting to garden because you can have your own food. You might want to clean out the garage. You might want to just tackle those projects you haven't had time to do. You could build a website, write a book. You could cook new recipes. What you want is to have something that engages you and involves you in a new way, that it has some creative energy to it. So when you're involved and engaged, that's one part, but you also need to do the opposite. You've got to take time for yourself, space to relax and to settle. We can't just be run by the demands that we put on ourselves or the demands that come from outside. That kind of wears us down. So we've got to let go of demands sometimes. And in order to do that, we need to really notice when we're getting overwhelmed and take a breather. Now, this is not always easy if there's not very much space in the house or if there's children, because they don't want to let you alone. But we have to do the best we can with that. And we start by letting other people know that we have this need and that we need to be undisturbed for a period of time. And if we have the space, we need to move into a quiet space. It could just be outside. It doesn't need to be anything very special. And we want to do something that is calming and settling. Something that settles not just our mind, but our nervous system, our physical being. So I'm going to go on to the thing that I think is really essential during this time, which is to quieten our minds and to settle our nervous system. So some of us have quietening practices like meditation, but each of us can find different quietening practices which suit us and suits our lifestyle, suits our nature, our lifestyle, our beliefs, our values. And so meditation is best if you can do it in the morning. That's a good time to kind of really settle yourself. And I actually have a little program for myself where I do my quietening practice, and then I might write my list, and then I do my exercise We'll talk about that in a moment. So just, okay, this is the beginning structure of my day. But some people, just sitting quietly for 5 minutes before you start some project. And I believe that's really important to do before you do something on the computer screen, for instance. Just to settle, quieten yourself, really feel yourself in the chair, feel, the back of your body rather than the front of the body, because we tend to go forward all the time. Feel your sit bones, feel your feet on the floor. Just about settling yourself. And if we're getting anxious or we're getting like a little bit head up, practicing some breathing. Now, deep breaths are really helpful, but the research shows that what's more helpful is what's called coherence breathing. And that's where you breathe in and out in a very rhythmic way. And you try to keep your out breaths just a little longer than your in breaths, with maybe just a short gap between the in and the out breath. So it's quite a simple breathing, just paying attention to your breath, but you're breathing a little longer on the out breath. What that tends to do is to calm down your physiology. So with the calming down of your physiology, of course, you need to do your exercise. Of all the things which are most helpful for our mental health, exercise always comes top. This is kind of confusing to people, but exercise really helps the body settle and deal with things. So we all need a routine that suits our body and suits our needs. Some of us love to exercise, and some of us really don't like to exercise. I come in the second group, and it's like a pain to try and get myself to exercise. So I have to look for exercise strategies which I can tolerate, which I enjoy. I tend to do what's called a 4-minute workout, which is, you can find it on the web. It's a very short, intense exercise, which is designed to generate nitrous oxide in your body, which dilutes the blood vessels and tends to settle your system. And it only takes 4 minutes. So it's very easy and quick. But there are so many other things you can do. You can do yoga, you do qigong for those people who are into those kind of things. And there's lots of online classes. But if you can get outside, gardening, running, biking, walking, all of those things are really good to get the movement of energy. Okay. So we actually need to not mentally tire ourselves out. We also need to kind of be physically tired so that we sleep better. Mental tiredness doesn't help us sleep. Physical tiredness does. So we want to sleep long and deeply. We want to wind down at the end of the day. And in order to do that, we need to avoid those things which overstimulate us. Screens tend to overstimulate the brain, overstimulating movies, but also particularly bad news. And our digestion tends to slow down at the end of the day, so late night snacking is not a great idea. We're going to aim for 7+ hours a night. For most people, that's actually a requirement. And if you slip below that, you need to make it up a bit. And you've got to make it up within like about a week. You can't make it up longer than that. You've kind of lost that sleep. Napping is good, but also the research on napping is interesting, which is that naps longer than 20 minutes are actually not so helpful. We go too deeply asleep and then we can wake up feeling groggy. So a short nap is really great. 10 to 20 minutes is a great thing for us. Now, talked about being overstimulated at night by media. And so we do need to ration media. A lot of us get pulled into the things on the television, on the computer. We need to stay informed, but we got to limit our exposure to anything that stirs up basically negative feelings: anger, sadness, fear. Some people find that if they keep on top of the news too much, they're constantly upset. So don't let yourself get sucked into the screen. And particularly, don't get sucked into conspiracy thinking. Conspiracy thinking doesn't help anybody at all. even if the conspiracy is true, it doesn't help anybody for you to know because you can't do anything about it. And it's good to recognize that, which is like, this is not something I need to spend my time and attention on. So you've got to balance the negative news with the positive things. There's a lot of wonderful things happening out there. There's a lot of great things. Human beings have really a capacity to help each other and to be generous and to be compassionate. And those are the things we don't always hear about. So we need to spend some time trying to find out about those things. And also things like art, anything in the arts, anything in the entertainments, which actually kind of fills you with that sense of how interesting human beings are. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is challenging negativity, because this is like a rabbit hole that we can all fall down into. And when we get into negative thinking, it kind of takes us over. So we've got to challenge that negative. We've got to actually say to ourselves, no, this isn't a good way to go. And there's an interesting way of approaching negative thoughts and negative feelings is to write them down. So write down any fears, anxieties, write down any frustrations, and particularly write down self-critical stuff when we're actually not being kind to ourselves. Those negative thoughts are the things that really decrease our resilience. And a good way to think of these negative thoughts is like mind weeds. You know, I'm a gardener, so I have got a war on weeds all the time. And so I'm always trying to get rid of them. They always come back, just like negative thoughts, and you just keep pulling them until they get weaker. So with your mind weeds, with your negative thoughts, frustrations, self-criticisms, the thing that helps is an odd thing. And for some people, it feels uncomfortable. But you read them out loud to yourself using your own name. So in the third person, you would say, Roland is very anxious at the moment, and that's because of the COVID crisis. I know that sounds a little strange, but that actually gives you a little distance, a distance from the feeling. When we have that distance, a little gap in between our experience and ourselves, we have more room to actually deal with it. So you need to be as specific as possible, and you listen to what you say. And then you can use, if you like, counteractions, what you might call antidotes, affirmations, positive self-talk to change your mood. So you might say to Roland, you can deal with this. And I know it sounds strange, but I talk to myself a lot. And I think talking to yourself is actually a really healthy thing to do, particularly when you feel as though you're not coping very well. So I think I've gone through more, but as I said, there's many other things that you can do for this. So these are just some ideas that you might want to put into practice. So I think that's enough. At the moment, I just wonder if you have any questions or any comments.
Thanks, Roland. That's great. I took some notes on some of this, and I'd say like more than, I don't know what my question is quite yet. I think here's kind of something that's kind of coming up for me as a leader in the nonprofit world, specifically thinking about this stuff. I do a lot of these practices already. So like self-care and leadership, this is like, I was told Spencer, I said, this is my jam. This is what I do. I also have a lot of trauma, and I've also had to do a lot of this stuff. So like, it's been, I feel like in a lot of ways, like the fact that I've been practicing these things has really like set me up in a place to be like, oh, right, I know how to do this, right? So for a lot of folks who maybe are really new to this, it can maybe feel like a lot. And especially something that I was thinking about as you were talking is like, for folks who are in places of leadership, I think like a lot of people's lives slowed down and a lot of people's lives picked up, and a lot of us, our lives picked up right? So there's not a lot of time and space to start to add new habits or new things. And so something I really like that you said around meditation was like 5 minutes, like taking it in chunks is something that I was told to do when I started that practice several years ago, just 5 minutes. But how to I guess for folks who are kind of in the place of there's an endless to-do list. There's not enough time to start to cultivate new creative energy and projects. There's a constant state of overwhelm, and you talked about that uncertainty, the reality of I really might be out of housing. For folks who are in those places, what would you suggest? I guess is my question. What would you suggest? Instead of adding, or I guess what I want to say is it can often feel like, oh, here's another to do. Oh, now here's my self-care to do. That one is a huge chunk. What would you suggest? How would you navigate that?
Well, that's actually, I meant to put that in because that's actually true. In some sense, more of us, many of us are more busy than we've ever been before. There seems to be so many things to fill our time. And because of the stresses, our energy level and our concentration level isn't as effective as it has been before. So we're actually not as good at coping with things as we normally are. And I have noticed that I don't get as many things done in a day, and I'm more tired at the end of the day. And I think this is actually common to this kind of stress situation. But there is one thing that we have to remember is that, yes, there are so many things to do and they're so overwhelming. But unless we look after ourselves, we have nothing to do them with. We are the only resource that we have, and we can't use ourselves up. Just as we would not expect, like yourself as a leader, you wouldn't expect your staff to be working 24 hours a day. You've got to lower your expectations of yourself. You've got to manage those expectations to say, if I don't do this, this is actually not beneficial for me. And yes, you don't want to add all of these things to your to-do list. And I've noticed that particularly with meditation. Some people, meditation is on their to-do list and it's just another stressful thing to do, which doesn't make any sense. So I would just choose one thing. Just say, okay, I need to put this one thing in. And just like you were saying, small chunks, just small changes. And it's interesting how small changes can make a difference. So that's basically the only thing I'd say, which is that, yes, we're overwhelmed. Yes, we're very busy. But we've got to break up the day. The research suggests that our concentration can work for about an hour and a half and then starts to decrease. It's a natural hour and a half rhythm that we have, a 90-minute rhythm, which goes on during the night and it goes on during the day. And so if we break it up around about, say 70 minutes and then take 10 minutes, I think there's, isn't there one of these time management systems which says take a break every 5 minutes so often? And because it increases effectiveness. Pushing yourself and pushing yourself, that your actual functioning goes down and down. So you have to think of yourself as your resource and work with that. Does that make sense? Yeah, but you can't have all of these to-do lists. So any questions from you, Spencer?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions, but I wasn't, it looked like Hayden was about to say something. Well, this one question that did come up in my mind is, to some degree you responded to it, but I'd like to hear you respond directly to this notion about planning your day and deciding how you're going to do that. I think for some folks, especially in the nonprofit space, it's very difficult to plan your day because the demands on your day emerge. And, you think that, I don't know how many times I started the day at thinking, this is what I'm going to do. And within 10 minutes of showing up, the day completely changed based on whatever emergency was happening. And I'm just curious what you think strategically a nonprofit leader can think about in terms of dealing with that situation, which happens pretty regularly for some folks.
Yes. And of course, that is actually adding to your stress. Because when you've got some sort of structure and then your structure is thrown up in the air, and then you've got to kind of scrabble to kind of put things together, it can actually just make it far more difficult. What to do with that? That's a very good question. Let me think.
I never came up with a good solution. I haven't come up with a good solution.
I know.
Except
There
to say
isn't,
that's just
there
how
isn't
it
a
goes.
great solution.
Hayden, I
But
can't
one of
imagine
the things,
that's not your life.
actually, you'd be surprised. So one of the things to do is, of course, prioritize. We have a tendency to overreact to new things, particularly as seeing them as a crisis, and react to a crisis. And I would say you've got to work out if it's one of three things. Is this a hassle, which is like everything? Is this a crisis, which demands that you do something in a timely manner, otherwise it gets worse? Or is it a disaster, like the COVID crisis, where you can't do anything about it? So everything comes in three categories. And I think we misjudge hassles as crises. So we tend to muster a lot more stress and much more reactive to what we think is a crisis. But if we can persuade ourselves, hold on, do I really need to do that right now? Or can I actually schedule it a little better? Can I put some boundaries around it? It's trying to get some containment, because without the containment, we lose that sense of structure and the sense of being in charge of what's happening. And I think what we do need to do with those, I mean, I have a tendency to react to emails, and I like to get rid of them fast. But then I can find that, oh my gosh, I've just spent 2 hours responding to emails, and some of those I didn't need to actually respond to until tomorrow, and now I don't have time to do the things which I meant to do. So it's better to actually go like, that one waits, that one waits, that one I have to deal. So it is a kind of triage system in the moment. I don't know if that helps at all, but you know, we all try to do the triage. We try to put it into the different categories. So any other questions?
I'm partly laughing because I think that I think Hayden and I sometimes are the email problems for each other.
You can take as much time as you want getting back to it.
I feel the same way, Hayden. Well, one thing is, I think of both of you. I know you both a little bit, but I think of both of you as much more disciplined and intentional in the way that you've thought about yourselves than I am. I have in the past. I have made mindfulness meditation an integral part of a program before, and that was because I was supposedly the head of that program and I could force other people to do it, but doing that to my own self has not been very successful most of the time. And I'm curious though, as you think back to your practice, you know, Hayden, you were mentioning that you remembered adding self-care to your life. Roland, you've been thinking about this quite a bit and you worked with a lot of people. What are things that you've found to be kind of highest payoff early adoption kinds of practices for yourselves, or that you've seen work for other people, especially for folks who haven't made self-care that much of a priority, in fact might even think of themselves as not really needing it, but then I love the way that you talked, Roland, where you were kind of identifying these markers of stress that we, especially people who perform well, don't necessarily even acknowledge. So what are some things that you found to be really good places to start with high payoff initially?
Yeah, I think for me, high payoff comes from taking breaks. That's the highest payoff for me. The one that works best, which is that I am more and more aware of, you know, my concentration level and my energy level, and then I need to do something different. I don't need to do nothing sometimes. I need to just do something different. And it's breaking up things, which I have found gives me energy to move through the day. So I found that as the highest payoff. Also, starting the day well. You know, the temptation to jump in and fix all those emails early on, to write them all, try and get rid of them. I found that doesn't work at all for me. That I actually have to have like a little structure. Okay, this is what I do, and this is what I do, and this is what I do, and then I do my emails. So not to be seduced into thinking if I just get that done, I will have more time to do other things. Everything needs to be in its place. So those, I think, are the highest payoff for me. So they are about just really a discipline and really getting your mind into the right place. And the other thing I would also say is like recognizing that if we don't do something, the world isn't going to end. Now, people might get upset. People might think bad thoughts about us, but the world is not going to end. I used to have a good supervisor who used to say, when I got really anxious about doing certain things as an early psychologist, she would say, "So is anybody going to die?" And that would be my, okay, I don't think so. So maybe I'm getting a little bit too pressured. So kind of getting perspective and not thinking that we're the only one who can do things. Other people can do it. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Hayden?
So many thoughts. I'll totally chime in. I love this question. Yeah, I'm thinking about it a lot. You know, there are a few things. Yeah, it brings up a lot. Okay, so that last thought, jumping off of that, you know, like I grew up in an environment where I felt like I had to perform a certain way or somebody was going to die. So that trigger is real, and like this crisis exemplifies that, right? And I think whatever our stuff is, whatever our triggers are, whatever our losses are, our stories, the ways in which we see the world, I feel like if it hasn't been healed, it's up right now, because this is like really like there is a collective trauma happening.
Absolutely.
And you know, that's some of the loss too, right? Like, yeah, lots of freedom and security, and like really feeling like the reality of the grief that is happening in our world. And so kind of on that note, like what you were just saying is like reminding ourselves like we're not responsible, we're not the cause of this. And like for me, it's like not being hard on myself. I'll get hard on myself for being hard on myself. Like it is like a serious thing, right? And so really coming back to self and connecting is something that like has been really helpful for me. And just realizing like we are all in this. And so like when you spoke about irritability too, I was like kind of laughing because like I'll get irritable about other people, but they're also irritable about something else. And it's like everyone is experiencing this. So like really trying to find some like graciousness and compassion for others too has been like a big part of it. But back to Spencer, your question around like our schedules being kind of up in the air, and also what's the easiest kind of, you didn't say low hanging fruit, but like the quickest payoff, I guess. Some really practical things that I've done that have been really helpful is trying to, which this seems nearly impossible at this time, but like trying to create more space in my schedule, knowing that it's gonna be filled, knowing that people are gonna be like, hey, can you jump on this call right now? Whereas before I would like stack my schedule and all my calls were, so then like when more calls came in, I didn't actually have the space to take breaks to do those things. So really like being intentional about my schedule. That's like what Roland was saying in terms of planning our days, planning our weeks, allowing there to be space. That's been really helpful. Knowing that I don't need to be on every call. That's been another thing. So that's the prioritizing piece, right? And Spencer, you asked this question of, I don't know what time it is these days, but a couple weeks ago, maybe when we were talking, that was like, how do you tell what's the difference between urgent and important? And the first thought that came to my mind was like, self-care is urgent, like that, which is so wild, right? But so true. And I think that's a great question that I've been chewing on in terms of like, yeah, how do you prioritize? Roland, I liked your 3 categories. Closing out my email and closing out my like Slack channels and all of that to focus on work that needs to get done. So like really separating the incoming communications and like the time that my brain needs to focus on like, okay, I'm working on this grant, like sectioning things off like that. And then the other like really practical, I think the biggest practical thing for me, and I'm in a privileged place because I can walk out, like I have a trail really close to my house, so I can get nature time, which is getting outside. The snow is like phenomenal because also less people are outside. Social distancing's easier when nobody wants to go out, but just like even small little walks have been huge. Part for that break, but part for me, it's like a connection to something bigger. Like I will get so narrow focused on like, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. This is the work thing. This is the thing I'm obsessing about. This is the conflict, whatever it is. And my brain will just spiral. And I also have insomnia problems too. So I'm in this camp. But my brain will just not stop obsessing. And that obsession doesn't actually get me anywhere. And I know that, but it's still, it's a practice, right? But when I can connect to something bigger, the snow is also really helpful because I was like, right, it still snows. Like seasons are happening. Like there is a world beyond, what's happening on my Zoom calls today. And connection to nature really does that for me. But whatever that is for someone, like for connection to others, like getting on and just like having fun with people, like having Zoom calls over dinner, whatever that is, to get me outside of my head and my thought, like my obsessive thinking around like the panic and stress. So those are I don't know if that
I really like what you said because I didn't put that in, but I think it's so important, is the feeling of connection and compassion for other people. The realization that there are many people suffering and that we kind of pick up on that on a collective level sometimes, and sometimes our stress is not that personal. It seems to be collective. And that kind of comes in waves. It's been different at different times. On another kind of thing, some of my clients are having extraordinary dreams, very, very unusual dreams. They're more about the collective than they are about personal things. So there's something else going on, not just at a personal level. And it's good to be open to that.
Are there other things, Hayden, that have come to your mind as we've been talking that you haven't had a chance to ask or respond to?
Probably, yeah, for sure. I don't remember what they are right now.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine.
One more other like really, I guess practical thing slash like thing that I think is up for a lot of leaders too. For folks who tend to like, Roland, you had kind of expressed some like harmful behaviors that we do for coping. I think for some of us, like work can be that. Like we can work to not feel, right? And in this time, I think that really is really being challenged right now when our work is essential. Like we're so on the front lines. We are really essential. We actually have to respond to this. And it's a fine line, right? And so I think for me, a lot of like what I've had to do too is like recognize that pattern and recognize that like where's the balance here. And then another like thing that really makes that harder is when we're all working from home. And Roland, you spoke about having kids, and I'm like, I'm in love with every parent that is like going through this right with their kids right now, and feeling a lot for all the kids stuck at home that might be having a hard time too. I have, an aging dog, and it's been lovely to hang out here. But something that's really hard for me is separating work. Like I've done so much work. I've done so much healing around separating my work and my home life, and really like trying to create those boundaries for myself and put work aside and like be in connection with my partner while I'm not working and not thinking about it. And now that I'm working from home, it's like so much more challenged. So that's like another thing when I think about self-care and leadership at this time is like, how do we create that separation when there is no separation? One thing I was doing pre-snow was, and this is absurd, but it worked for me, is like, I like to bike to work. So I was leaving my house, biking in a circle and coming back to my house to start my work day and then doing it again at the end of the day. Like, all right, work's over, I'm gonna bike in a circle and go back home. And it was super silly, but then my partner started doing that, like with a walk, right? Like separating or like making sure there's time. Like last night I had a board meeting. So that ended at 8, and then I'm downstairs having dinner with my partner like that. And usually there's like a long bike ride home. So how do I like, actually create a little bit more space, like do some exercise, like go on a walk, whatever that is to like help me separate some of those things.
That is, I think that bicycle journey you take is actually really precious. That is such a good idea, because a lot of us don't realize this, but we have cues in our environment between work and home. They might be just, for me, it's a corner actually. As I go round a corner on my way home, that is the separation between work and home. And I've learned to kind of let go. But we're not having those, as you say, we're not having those cues, and it's really hard to get the boundaries. And I really like that idea, which is you take a bike ride, and it's like, that's the way I've always separated work and home, so I'll do that. Very creative. It can be as simple as like a view, going outside your house, walking around the house maybe, and coming back in. Okay, now I'm at home, I'm not at work. Anything that sets up a kind of a system which reminds you or cues you in to a change of state, because otherwise we get boundarylessness and this transition issues where things just kind of get all messy between the boundaries. But those are great ideas.
You know what I notice and that I love is you both at various times have said, I know this sounds silly, or I know that this kind of sounds weird, but, and of course, it will always sound silly to us, but there's a part of me that wants to say that this is a time when we can actually embrace our humanity, and those things are not actually silly. They're life. That's how we function, and like that, those are things that are good for us to do, whether it's to talk to ourselves in the third person or to create the rituals that separate the home and our work. And one of the things that we are learning collectively is just how we as humans function and what's really key and important to us. It's important to us to keep human connection. It's important for us to do work that matters. It's important for us to understand that our emotions are real, grief is real, appreciation is real, joy is real, and these things matter. Art matters. And if anything, COVID-19 is bringing to the fore these kind of fundamentals of our humanity that are so rarely recognized and appreciated. And I feel silly even saying that kind of thing out loud, but
I love
that is wonderful. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we have to think in those big pictures, otherwise we get too narrow.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like I love it because I think like we need joy and laughter and silliness now more than ever. Well, we've always needed that, right? And for me, it can be hard to reconcile that. Like, yeah, we are in this collective trauma. Like, is it okay to have joy? And like how do we reconcile those things? And I think it's so important to be able to hold all of that and to allow ourselves that freedom to be like, yeah, I got a bike ride to work today, or whatever it is, and make sure that we're creating space for that too.
Well, thank you both. I personally got a lot out of this conversation just as it is. I hope that I hope others may find it useful too. Thanks, Roland.
Thank you so much for you both for being there and for listening.
Fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roland.